Welcome. Today we will be addressing insurance and the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be discussing how you can maximize your insurance coverage and really tips for renewal. And this is going to be kind of an issue spotting to let you know what's out there, what we're seeing so far. Some of you may have attended other webinars over the course of the last 9 months on these issues. Some things have changed and we now have some good case law in areas. Some of you may have already filed insurance claims that either were denied or that you're starting to get additional questions on. And we'll kind of touch on where things sit in the country on all of these issues. My name is Selena Linde. I'm a partner. I'm actually the chair of the insurance recovery section at Perkins Coie. My office is in the Washington, D.C. office of Perkins Coie, but for those of you who joined us a few minutes early as we were dealing with our technical issues, I'm actually sitting on the big island of Hawaii right now during the pandemic. So that would be why the weather looks nice outside. But trust me, most of my time is spent here right in this office that you see me in. So it's wonderful weather, but unfortunately, life in the time of an insurance attorney during COVID is quite busy. But I'm not complaining at all. We also have with us, as everybody knows, the chairman. And Dale, let me let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I miss seeing everybody face to face. I miss my hugs, as I mentioned earlier today. This is a great organization and we're glad that we're able to do this convention virtually. I've been doing insurance for, gosh, a long time. I've been doing this festivals and events for 31 years. For those of you that know me, I recently retired at the end of July. I am now acting as an insurance consultant. But I'm also just enjoying life. It's really cool. I'm looking very much excited to a new granddaughter that's going to be born here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and we'll be able to do a lot more spoiling. But anyway, I'm very glad we could get Selena to do this with us today. There's a lot of concerns that everybody has with regard to insurance and what's going on with coronavirus. So we're going to go back and forth. Selena, I'm going to make her do most of this. She's done these. She and I have done several of these together, but I'll kick in a few cents here and thereabouts. And as Selena mentioned earlier too, we don't have a moderator for our session. So if everyone could please save your questions for the end. We're going to leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions, and make sure that we want everybody to be heard, and we'll answer your questions as best we can. Use the chat box. We'll take a look at that, and we'll read back questions when we get to the end. I'm still having some computer issues. I can only see the slideshows, but Selena, why don't you go ahead, and then we can take it from there.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So today, kind of an overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to walk through potential coronavirus claims that you and your companies can face. Then we'll talk about key insurance policies, and it's really well beyond just the property policies as we'll walk through. And we'll talk and kind of sprinkle throughout how carriers have reacted to some of these claims. While some claims have been easily covered and we've seen carriers writing checks fairly quickly, others have been denied and others are still in limbo. Then we'll talk about, there's even beyond just your typical policies like your employment practices policies, your workers' comp, your property policies. There's even some other policies that can potentially respond to COVID claims. So we want you to be aware of all of them just in case the situation arises. And then the last thing that we'll touch upon is really how to prepare in advance and how to protect your coverage upon renewal. There are new exclusions being brought in by insurance companies, but you actually have some leverage in getting those pushed back. Great, and we can move on to the next one. So there's two different types of claims in insurance. There's first-party claims and there's third-party claims. What first-party claims are is that's your damage. So you've been damaged, you're filing something to get money back, something directly from you, versus a third-party claim, which is a liability claim. And somebody has sued you and you're actually filing a claim to get money back to be able to pay your liability. But first-party claims that can come up in the COVID are your event cancellation claims, which obviously for this festival is a big one. Then workers' compensation or first-party claims, business interruption, lost revenue under your property policies. And then civil authority, which is also found under your typical property policies, and communicable disease response and interruption. And that can be a claim made under your property policy, under your event cancellation policy, or even under some of the employment practices liability policy. And we'll kind of walk through that. On to the next slide, third-party claims are your bodily injury. So this is you hold an event, somebody sued you because they've contracted COVID. That's a third-party bodily injury claim. Failure to protect and prevent. Again, you've been sued because a number of people came in, they say that they were exposed, the CDC guidelines weren't followed, the social distancing wasn't followed, there wasn't enough hand sanitizer, etc. And then you have shareholder claims. If anybody on this is a publicly traded company, we're seeing shareholder claims that you didn't do enough to protect the business. In the event in hospitality space, shareholder claims are, again, CDC guidelines, the local regulations weren't followed, or you opened too early. Those types of claims can come in as well. So,
What are the sources of insurance coverages that we have? Go ahead, Selena.
No, go for it, Jill.
Okay, yeah. When you're looking at how can you protect yourself, Selena's already mentioned some of these types of insurance. One of them being event cancellation policies. Were you able to have your event? Did your event have to be canceled because of governmental entities requiring that you did that, or local entities, local health departments, whatever the case may be? But there's event cancellation policies that come into play when you have that. We have workers' compensation. If you have somebody that is on a payroll that is injured, or they contract COVID, and they may file a workers' compensation claim because of that. We also have property policies, especially time element, extra expense. If you have a business income policy that you know that you need this much money, you have to be able to have your event, and it costs more to have your event because you had to move it. That's extra expense. You may have to look at that from that perspective. The other thing you have to look at is the communicable disease endorsement that could be, or potentially would be, or would have been on your policies. Selena is going to talk a little bit more, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on with regard to whether or not there is or is not an endorsement on your policy that excludes communicable disease. And if it in fact includes an exclusion for viruses in COVID. And we've seen a lot of things that really people are relying on different exclusions, but there is really, most policies do not have a viral exclusion on the policy. They have other things on there. They have bacteria, different types of exclusions on the policy. But a couple other things we want to look at too is obviously something that could pay for loss, and that's your commercial general liability policy. Everyone, if you have an event, you're going to be in the city park, you're going to be someplace else, you're going to be in somebody's building, you buy a general liability policy that protects you for losses in case the public, somebody gets injured, they fall, slip, trip, fall. This policy, does it protect you in case of someone submitting a claim because they contracted COVID because you did or did not do what you should have done. Another thing to look at is directors and officers policies. We all have boards of directors, and the board of directors is responsible for decisions made by your organization. Did that board of directors follow through on their decisions? We'll talk about that a little bit more in detail later too, but those are just some of the valuable resources. Some of the policies and some of the things that we have with regard to event cancellation, you've got to look to see if they are typically an all-risk type of policy. All of the policies, if you came to an insurance carrier and you wanted to do an event cancellation policy, you want to do it for next year, they're probably going to say, guess what, we're going to put a COVID-19 exclusion on the policy, we're going to put a communicable disease exclusion endorsement on your policy, and there's not going to be coverage. Most people that had a policy that was issued for an event possibly that took place this year, and you bought the policy maybe early in the year, or you bought it last year, chances are there is no exclusion for COVID-19. So if you had to cancel your event and you lost revenue, then there could be places for you to recoup some of that. The event cancellation policies, large ones like we just said, it does generally cover those diseases, okay? Those exclusions we see started when we heard about COVID. That's when things were starting to do. And you need to check, you need to talk to your agent, talk to your company, find out, take a look at the policies, take a look at the proposals. If you're negotiating for next year, you need to look to see whether or not you can negotiate to have some coverage for that. That's major important thing. And if you look at event cancellation, some typical wording, we're going to indemnify you up to the limit of insurance for your loss as a direct result of cancellation, abandonment, curtailment, postponement, relocation. How many of us had to change our event that we were going to do? We downsized it. We made it, put it in a different spot if we actually were able to have our event. But just some typical wording in event cancellation.
And Dale,
Selena?
let me talk a little bit about what those mean. If you go back to that, if you can hit back one slide.
Oh yeah, go back down. Okay.
Or actually, this is fine. Either.
That's fine. We're good.
So what that coverage grant talked about was abandonment, cancellation, and curtailment, multiple things, right? So cancellation means your inability to commence the insured event at the regularly scheduled date and time. So that's cancellation. Abandonment is your inability to keep open the insured event during a period subsequent to the regularly scheduled date and time. So they're different. Curtailment, your inability to open or keep open the event for the entire time. And then lastly, postponement. Now postponement and relocation. Now what we've seen, as Dale said, is if you were affected in 2020 by a cancellation and you purchased the policy, the event cancellation policy in 2019, most of the large brokers, their standard form, which is done and created by them, like Willis is one of your large 3 US brokers, their form had no communicable disease coverage. Had no communicable disease exclusion. So it was covered under the policy. That's the overwhelming majority prior if it was purchased in 2019. Now, there are some exceptions. There was as we all know when SARS came about, so if you're an international company or if you do a lot of international events, there were some SARS exclusions and communicable disease exclusions under some of the brokers' policies and some of the carriers' policies, but the overwhelming majority did not have them. What we have found is that when clients have been filing the event cancellation claims, without an express virus exclusion or SARS exclusion, we have received the monies already, and we are getting paid, and those have moved forward. The one area where we're seeing pushback for what should be an already covered claim is if the company didn't do anything to attempt to postpone it. And so at the very beginning, clients that canceled in March and April, the carriers were saying, okay, but you're attempting to postpone, right? You're moving it to November, to December. Back at the very early stages of the pandemic, when carriers were really pushing to move events to the fall, not thinking that we would still be in this at that time. That has changed. There were initial denials for companies that did not immediately postpone and that thought, no, this pandemic is going to last a long time. Those are being revisited. If you received one of those denials, you can definitely revisit it. It should not have been denied in the first place, even if you didn't postpone till November, given what we were dealing with being a new situation and unknown from a health perspective throughout the world. So I encourage anybody that has a denial to take another look now and to start fighting that. If instead you had, we've seen quite a bit of carriers that went back and forth on asking questions. Okay, well, can we wait to postpone? Can you, how was your refund policy? Do you have to refund all the money? Do you have an ability to keep it if you do relocate or postpone to another date? And I should say relocation kind of came up at that same time during February and March. And while some carriers were saying, okay, let's go ahead and postpone till the fall, we expect you to do that. Your contracts allowed that, and they'll look over all of the documentation that you sent in. Others said, hey, Europe's looking better. We expect you, if you did do, and you do international conventions, they're obviously not going to make somebody who's doing the convention directly only in Michigan relocate to China or to Europe. But if you regularly did international conventions and it was something that could be relocated, we were seeing a push for that. So again, the denials under event cancellation, I would say, are specious, and that you have a good ability to fight back. Now, there are some that have virus exclusions, and there are some that have, as Dale said, bacteria and other exclusions, and we find those mainly in our other lines of policies. But under the event cancellation, unless it is really the key communicable disease exclusion that was introduced after SARS, that one is going to be extremely difficult to get around. But other than that, you should be good with your event cancellations that happened in 2020. Now, a number of you are probably very lucky because event cancellation insurance is something that you can purchase up to 36 months in advance. And so to the extent that you still have policies that will cover you for 2021 and 2022, you're going to be in a better position than those who have to renew now. As Dale said, we're seeing exclusions for communicable diseases, but you have the ability and the leverage to negotiate that with additional premiums. And the question becomes how much you do on a contracting side with the participants in your festivals and working together with your carrier during the underwriting process on, okay, we will give full refunds or we will give partial refunds, how it works, what they would be responsible for versus what you're going to be responsible for. And the contracts they expect you to be able to receive from your lighting, from your crews, that you have coronavirus ability to back out of those contracts within a certain number of days. And so the carriers are willing to say, okay, if you need to set up your convention space 30 days beforehand, but COVID's running rampant and you know 30 days beforehand, we don't want to pay that risk. But so that's a contracting risk. You need to make sure that your lighting operators and others are willing to turn on a dime, and at 30 minutes you cancel within 30 days, you're fine. However, let's say COVID's looking really good in your area and you're in a state, in a city where large gatherings up to 500 or 1,000 people are allowed by that time. Well, if it's within that 30 days, okay, fine, you're going. And then 15 days before your event, boom, the city says, nope, sorry, no more events. That's what carriers are willing to pay. So they're really trying to get you to do additional contracts. Some will go 30, 60 days with your others, but you have to negotiate that. And it is a premium issue. You move to the next slide.
Yeah, one thing I want to interject here also too is some people have contracts, some festivals have contracts with their sponsors, that their sponsors get this, that, A, B, C, D for where their sponsorship monies are. If they don't get A, B, C, D, then you have to give that sponsorship money back. That could be something that could be covered under your cancellation insurance. You probably list that, that's expenses, that's something that goes on. The other thing too is, and you mentioned this too, Selena, I'm just going to throw this in there. We don't know what's going to happen with regard to the state of Michigan. We don't know what's going to happen with the governor. And I know that Michigan Festivals and Events Association, the staff, the board, everyone, Mike is having great details with a lot of people. They've submitted, ways to open, different suggestions, how to move forward, et cetera, et cetera. We don't know what's going to happen with that. So it's good to be prepared and be ready. So the other thing, Selena already reached and touched base on the cancellation, abandonment, curtailment, postponement, and relocation. The other thing is some cancellation policies also cover failure for speakers not appearing. Not necessarily just speakers, but possibly you paid a band to come. You have a national band that's going to come to the festival and it's going to cost you $100,000. Well, that could also be something that could be covered under your event cancellation policy. And also failure to vacate the venue. You've got to leave because of health regulators or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit more about that speaker one, because that is one the carriers are willing to write into your 2021 and your 2022 policies right now. And specifically on that, they're willing to write that if you've got a keynote, like obviously, Dale and I today at this festival, if this presentation didn't go on, there's other ones that you could have joined. Carriers aren't going to be willing to say, okay, Dale and Selena, you're key people, and so we're going to do a failure. If one of you gets COVID, we're going to refund everybody the money. Not going to do it.
Selena, does that mean we don't get our fees for speaking, right? I'm kidding, everybody. But no, you're right. That's a big thing with regard to the speakers, and the entities and the companies out there are willing to write these.
They are, and so what they're willing to do right now with those keynote ones. So if you have somebody, or the keynote bands, if you have a big thing that's a draw that is one of the main reasons people are signing up, or you're really focused around one speaker, that's the key speaker. Those are the ones that they are willing to write, that if the speaker comes down with COVID, that you would be able to refund everybody's money, even past the dates, and all of your fees for setting up the presentations, etc. So you do want to carefully look at that. You want to navigate it, whether it's a band, whether it's a speaker, but items that bring the draw and that people would cancel as a result of, those are ones that they are willing to do a actual health COVID, if it's contracted by that individual, that keynote person, they would pay. Okay.
In addition to speakers or bands, the Blue Angels coming, the Thunderbirds coming to your event. Possibly you're bringing another exhibit from someplace else to come to your festival, and that exhibit can't travel. We have guidelines, and they can't come in your state, or they can't leave their state for whatever matter. Those are things to look at.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, one of the other things, it has to be you. So, I mean, it has to be you. It can't be you. It can't be your voluntary decision to cancel. It can't be, oh, you know what, we're just not feeling good about it now. We think the numbers are going out. Those are not going to be covered under event cancellation. And that's also one of the items that we saw some pushback on at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, that being said, there are, force majeure, there are something when the pandemic started, because it was so unknown and because of how scary it was, how we had multiple different jurisdictions saying different things. We had different health reports. We have been successful, and carriers have been reasonable in looking at that quote unquote voluntary and determining what exactly is voluntary. And I think the courts will be friendly to policyholders in this area with respect to the early part of the pandemic. At this point moving forward, they are not going to be nuts. They expect we all know it. We know what we're getting into. You know what the language is in your policies. But I do believe that the courts will interpret voluntary cancellation from the early part of the pandemic different than they will be interpreting it moving forward. So be careful about how that's written in your policies that you're procuring now. The other issue is they require the mitigation. So that's what we were talking about before. Can you postpone? Can you relocate? Or is this an annual event that no, you're not going to recoup it. You're just going to have to wait till the next year to make that up.
Right. Okay. All right. You know this one, Selena.
And have they paid? Yes, they have. Have they denied? Yes, they have denied. And most of those are not valid denials because they're under really broad insurance policies that were purchased in 2019. So I encourage anybody who's received a denial under their event cancellation policies to reach out to people and to make sure, to double check it with your brokers, with your insurance coverage counsel, with your insurance consultants, because that should most likely be a paid policy. But it's one of the good ones. This is one area where, moving forward for the future and for your next festivals, if you're careful with the language, you will have true coverage. We can't say that yet about some of the other policies that we're about to start getting into, but with these ones, it's valid. You should have been paid. If you haven't been paid, you need to talk to somebody.
Okay, and Selena's going to talk about workers' comp.
Okay, and workers' comp will be quick on, but this we want everybody to recognize, because while most of your festivals may take place in Michigan, some of your festivals take place outside the state with Michigan people that you're moving different places, that you're going on trips with, and the workers' comp is all state driven. And the regulations applicable to COVID-19 are changing still on a daily basis, and states are adding new people in. Now, we all know that first responders are considered to be a different class of individuals when it comes to COVID. That's been expanded in some states to include grocery workers, to include retail workers, to include restaurant workers. We may see it include festival workers in certain states, places where you have mass gatherings that are deemed safe, but then something goes awry. So be careful and double check if you have an employee who contracts COVID or who says that they contracted COVID while they were working on an event, that will typically be covered under workers' comp. But you have to double check the regulations, and you need to make sure that you're filing everything appropriately. Now, it is very difficult that if that person says that let's say it's a festival. In some states and in Michigan, I just checked on this a couple of days ago. There's no law right yet on directly for large gatherings and for individuals that work in large gatherings. Some of the states have them for amusement parks, for other items. So I was checking kind of in that arena. There's nothing yet, but what can happen is that the courts and how they'll interpret, and really the workers' compensation state regulators will determine, did it truly arise out of the course of your employment? So is this because 17 people are backstage in a 10 by 10 room that they have to be in order to do the lighting, or up above on the rafters looking down? Or is this just, no, it was spread, it's an outdoor venue, anybody would have received it, the customers get it at the same time. It wasn't actually just as a reason of your employment. So they'll kind of curtail that and look at it in different ways. And that depends, that will then dictate whether it's going to be a workers' compensation claim for your company, or whether it's going to be a commercial general liability claim, where then the employee ends up suing the company, or asking the company, not even suing, but making a demand or a claim against the company that would be filed instead under your CGL insurance. So just, if this happens, we put this up here, we want you to issue spot. You always want to check with your state board first. You want to go through workers' comp to the extent possible. And if that doesn't work and you get a demand from an employee, then move towards your CGL insurance. Causation is going to be key. And this is kind of what I was just talking about. Stationed in high-risk areas. You're up in the rafters. There's nowhere else to go. You have to be around 6 people. You're back in a lighting room. You're in a control panel. Those types of things. The other issue is quarantining in place. For workers' compensation, if you know that one of your employees has gotten sick, and thus they were with 6 other of your employees, so you tell them they can't work, they all must go home, they all have to quarantine for 14 days. That is covered by some states under workers' comp for those 14 days of lost work, whereas your company is not paying them paid leave, but instead will be covered under your workers' comp policies. So these are things to look at if you find yourself in that situation. Workers' comp is going to have the normal exclusions: willful misconduct, failure to comply with the safety laws or regulations. If you're telling all your employees that to be 6 feet social distancing at all times, if you're telling them that they have to wear masks whenever they're around other people, and you have 2 or 3 employees that come in, you refuse to wear masks, refuse to do anything, refuse to social distance, those are not going to be covered by the workers' comp, which can actually hurt your company, because then you've got a different issue where you're getting something excluded under one. Is it going to be covered under another? And we're starting to see some state regulators make inroads on this and start having discussions on whether or not they want to change the workers' comp law so that violators would still be covered under workers' comp, so that the employers would not be hurt with the medical liability, as long as the employer was acting appropriately and had asked the individuals to leave under a certain amount of time, etc., but not making the employer have to escalate a situation and then not be covered for a loss that happens as a result.
Yep. All right, first-party property. When we talk about first-party property, we're going to talk mainly about 3 different types of things. And one would be like property coverage, your buildings. Another thing would be your inland marine coverage, and your. I'll talk a little bit later about time element. As far as the policies that are issued, and you're looking at that, there's 2 different types of policies. One is an all-risk policy. It covers everything unless it's quote-unquote excluded. Or you have a policy that only covers certain perils, certain things, and if it's going to be covered, there's going to be a list in your policy saying these perils are covered for loss. And it also, when you're looking at that, you're looking at property damage and economic losses because of that. Usually, these do require some type, usually, keyword there, a direct physical loss. Okay, is the property contaminated? Can you not use your property? Can you not use your building? Is it unfit for use? Can you do that? That's one of the questions. Or did you have a mandatory closure, or, as Selena pointed out earlier, voluntary closure? Be very, very careful about voluntary. We don't have a lot of say with regard to mandatory closures, but voluntary closures, we have to close a building. We can't use the building anymore because of COVID, because of what's going on. A lot of this is going to be done on a case-by-case determination. Depends on how the policy is written, whether or not it was, like I said, an all risk or a named peril policy, but some questions to ask. If you look at time element, you're looking at business income, extra expense, those types of things. We've all incurred those types of things. If you have to cancel something, you have to cancel your festival, you need to cancel an event, a concert, those types of things. You're looking at business interruption, contingent business interruption, if you things that would cause this, possibly civil authority. If you can get into the property, that's ingress, or you need to leave. I mean, how do you depart? How do you exit? We see claims all the time because somebody gets injured, they slip, trip, fall because of leaving and coming to an event. But that goes even further with regard to time element. Do you have to take a different route? Can you not go the normal way you need to go to an event? That causes people not to come there. Also, extra expense huge, because you had to close that. You had to go to a different park. It's going to cost you more. You had contracts where you had paid so much for sanitation, so much for porta potties. Now you're in a different venue. Maybe that venue requires more porta potties. So you're going to have to pay more for that. That's an extra expense that you have incurred because of COVID, if it is indeed covered. The other thing to look at, we talk about endorsements, and we talked about this a little bit already. It's the same answer, the same thing. Coverage for infectious disease, communicable diseases. Is there coverage for a pandemic? We didn't talk about this. I think we talked this in one of our earlier sessions that we did. Selena, I think it's a good time now to talk about that. One of the things that, if you folks remember 9/11, when we had that terrible terrorist act on the Twin Towers, on the Pentagon, and there was all of this up in the air whether or not it's covered, not covered. And then a lot of people were buying policies for liability, for their property. They were concerned whether or not that was available or not. Well, the government came down and said, you have to provide coverage for terrorist activities. You have to provide that coverage, but what you can do is you can say, list it as an option, and if somebody wants it, they can pay extra for it. And a lot of people didn't buy it. We think that might happen with COVID, with viruses, with different types of things, to call it out and say, you can cover that. It's just going to cost you X amount more. So it's something that you're going to have to look at. As the slide says, you look at different carriers. They provided pandemic endorsements after Ebola. Huge thing. Somebody gets Ebola, it's pretty bad. Munich Re also does a big policy. They call it Pathogen RX. And there is availability of coverages out there with endorsements. You may have to pay more for it, but it's something you need to know about. Okay.
Absolutely. Let me add in a couple of things.
Yes, go ahead.
So one of the things on the communicable disease coverage, we'll get into this, there's another couple slides on this coming right up. But what Dale mentioned is physical damage. Physical damage is generally a requirement, 99% of the policies. The question becomes, what is physical damage? And how is physical damage interpreted by the courts? And there was just recently, in the last couple of weeks, a great North Carolina decision for policyholders on this issue with respect to COVID-19. And it was a decision that COVID-19 itself causes physical damage to property. So indoors, in a retail, if there is a confirmed case of COVID-19, it has damaged the property because the property cannot be used as it's intended. You can't open, you can't have people in there, you can't conduct your business. That is a huge win for policyholders. We expect to see more cases like that. It's been slow. There's more than 1,200 COVID cases filed, business cases filed throughout the United States right now. We've seen about 4 that have been bad for policyholders, that have been motions to dismiss where the policyholder has been dismissed. And we've seen the North Carolina one, which is a great policyholder decision. We've seen many where the policyholders have made it past summary judgment, but not as strong as the North Carolina case. And then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court case the Pennsylvania Supreme Court actually had a great case real early on, March or April of this year, when they were being challenged about the restrictions and they were being challenged on the shutdown. And it's a case that you can use the language that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court states that COVID is so prevalent in the community, in the areas, that it is everywhere. And that even if you don't have a confirmed case, that it is assumed and to be within your space if you're in those large metropolitan areas that have an outbreak at that particular given time. So be careful and take a look at rejections and denials that you've received under your property policies. One of the things specifically on the communicable disease, as Dale mentioned, these policies existed, and there were special endorsements because of Ebola, because of SARS that came out that had exclusions as well. So you have there's a 2006 virus exclusion that's awful, and it's going to be very difficult to get around. It's not impossible in some cases with the facts, it shouldn't apply. But in most, that's going to apply to this situation. It was crafted by the insurance departments to actually exclude exactly the type of thing like COVID-19. So unless the other parts of your policy don't work correctly, or unless it gets taken out and carved back out by a state mandatory endorsement or something else, that particular exclusion is going to be very difficult. Others, however, a regular virus exclusion, not the 2006 one, a bacteria microbe, a pollution exclusion we've seen insurance companies use, those should not exclude COVID-19 from coverage. And there will be tons of fighting on that. And just like in 9/11, where you saw, okay, now there's terrorism coverage and it's going to be available. Here, there's communicable disease coverage that they're making more available and that they're going to have to offer people, and that's where it looks like it's going. Even before that, you should be covered under those prior policies if it is not a clear and explicit exclusion that deals specifically with a COVID-19 type situation like the SARS one. They weren't intended for that purpose. The pollution exclusion was not intended for communicable diseases. You have great arguments to be able to push back on those. And not only that, but like we saw in 1986, 1986 was a year when something called the absolute pollution exclusion came into effect in policies. And it came after we had all the Love Canal litigations, all the environmental concerns, all the dumping, all the manufactured gas plants, and all of a sudden the U.S. was facing this massive environmental crisis with the EPA going in, requiring cleanup, requiring additional funds to be spent, and people were like, well, I want to use my insurance coverage, and they said, no, you have a pollution exclusion. The courts, it was not explicit enough, and so a absolute pollution exclusion came into effect. That is where I see this going. I think that we will have a number of challenges, and a number of policyholder-friendly states will find coverage under these policies eventually, and a number of insurance-friendly states will find that there is no coverage, and instead there will be an introduction into the insurance services office of an absolute virus exclusion moving forward.
Yep, that's where I see this going too. But like you mentioned, Selena, too, there's some keywords. Maybe we should say some hot words to look for and listen. If you're denied a claim and they say something, it's because of pollution. Well, do I have an absolute pollution exclusion on my policy? Those things aren't going to hold up. You need to ask again. You need to talk to some other counsel and find that out. But it's going to be a learning curve that we're going to have.
Yeah, and quite frankly, with the lame duck legislatures in all the states right now, we expect to see the regulations start again and see real movement on this come February of next year. We do not expect to see much at all in the next couple of months.
Correct. Okay, are we ready? I think we're ready for the next slide. No, we can keep going here. All right.
And we can.
Do I go back?
No. We've talked about that. That's the North Carolina.
Oh yeah, we're good.
There's a lot of good cases out there, but you should be, if you've got a denial. Now, one of the things that we were recommending to a number of our clients were the property policies are going to be difficult. The carriers are going to deny under a number of them. We weren't advocating run out right away and file your lawsuit. You can sit back. You don't have to spend the money on something that may be denied. You can sit back. If you get a denial, then it's based on the statute of limitations, or if there is a suit limitation clause in your policy. Now you want to make sure that if there's a suit limitation clause in your policy and you have 1 year from a denial or 1 year from the day you make claim to file a suit, that you preserve your right. But other than that, you can sit back, you can look at what the state legislatures do, where the courts come out, and then re-engage with your insurance carrier at that time and save some money.
Definitely. Okay. Oh, let's look here.
Do you want me to do CGL?
Yeah, go ahead, do that. Do the CGL.
Sure. So we talked a little bit about CGL policies. These are your general liability policies. So this will cover you for third-party claims, like we discussed. You know, if a participant comes, somebody comes to your festival, they say that they contracted COVID there. They say they've received, you know, they were lucky they didn't get that sick, but they caught it. They were asymptomatic, but they quarantined for 14 days. They underwent emotional distress, thinking that they were infecting themselves or their family. Those types of claims would be covered under your CGL policies. Again, same types of exclusions we've been talking about, the bacteria and virus exclusions, the pollution exclusion, the microbe exclusion. Most of these should not apply. You have to be careful. Carriers will immediately send denials or they'll send things back called a reservation of rights. Unless it is specific to your situation and unless it really is that 2006 virus-only exclusion, you should have arguments for coverage. You can skip to the next one.
Yep, okay. Computer locked up. Sorry about that.
I know.
All right. The other thing we talked a little bit about this is directors and officers insurance. I call it directors and officers. I call it sleep insurance. You know, if you're going to have an event, I'm going to serve on a board of directors. I want to make sure that event has, that entity has directors and officers. It covers me. It covers me as the board of director. It covers me as an officer. It covers decisions made by that board, by that entity that is making decisions. You're looking at, if somebody files a lawsuit against XYZ festival, they're probably going to name the festival, they're going to name the executive director, they'll probably name the board of directors, everybody. That's what happens. You got to look to see whether or not, you know, coronavirus coverage, does it involve claims, is it alleging for failure to disclose the risks? The board of directors didn't tell people that the risks are out there. I mean, we all know that coronavirus is out there, but possibly while the board is negotiating potential contracts with people for sponsorships, for costs of venues, maybe the board of directors was found at fault because they didn't disclose those types of things. Mitigation, we talk about that as well. You've got to do your best to prevent the loss to be worse or bad or whatever. You have to do what is due diligence, okay? The other thing is the government protocols. Do you really know what those government protocols are yet? We're learning. We know that they're changing. Will they continue to change? Probably. Will we reach a point where the government protocols will be the same everywhere? And is it based on your state? Is it based on your region? Is it based on local health authorities? These are claims that we've seen with directors and officers. We've seen this out there. If the government tells you to do this, you don't do it, or the board of directors says, well, we don't have to do that because the local government says this, or the health department says this, or they didn't say that, there could be some claims because of that. Some of these exclusions also, you're looking at bodily injury exclusions. Directors and officers are for decisions, for things that happen. It's not for somebody slip, tripping, and falling and breaking a leg, but it's for emotional distress. It could be for different kinds of things. Can you talk, Selena? Can you talk a little bit about some of the carrier reactions to some of the pandemic claims with regard to directors' office? I know you've seen some.
Yeah, the D&O claims that we're seeing, really a lot of them center around failure to follow the government protocols. Yeah. And it's really almost like a negligence kind of standard that we're seeing the carriers use and push back on. And so shareholders will say, you did not follow the CDC guidelines that were in effect on the day that XYZ occurred. And the problem, and what we've seen with a number of clients, is that they thought that they were following the proper guidelines because they followed the local guidelines, but they didn't follow the state guidelines, which conflicted, or they didn't follow the federal guidelines, which conflicted at that particular day and time. So what we've been advising clients, and what we've seen happen, and we're pushing back with the carriers, and I think we'll be successful in winning a lot of these denials. But one thing, just from advice-wise, is that we're saying take the most stringent of the three, and you have to check it the day before. If you have a large event, it is not good enough to make all of your decisions the week before, the month before. These are ever-changing times, and all of a sudden you may need to have 5 more gallons of hand sanitizer on hand, spread out every 10 feet, because that came in 24 hours before your event. You have to be nimble these days. You have to be checking those every single day prior to any large event, and make sure that you're on par with the most stringent requirements all the way through. You will never be hurt for being too stringent. You will for being too lax. And I know that that's not necessarily great for all of your attendees who want you to be more lax in some instances, but it will protect you and protect your company. The government protocols, the other issue with that is the total number of people. So we've seen shareholder suits related to, look, you were supposed to have less than 100 people. That's what all the guidelines were, and 110 were in. And as a result, yes, maybe those extra 10 people didn't cause it, and we can't prove causation, but it still makes you in a violation, and it can be an intentional act violation under the policies that the carriers can specifically exclude for, because you had the ability to cut it off at the 100 people and you failed to. So you intentionally allowed additional violations of the government protocols. So be careful about that.
Yeah, I know we talk, and all of us are getting tired of hearing about, be careful, do this, do that. We all want our lives back. We all want to be able to assemble and have the great events. Michigan has awesome events. I spend more time up there enjoying festivals than I do down here in Indiana where I live. But we all have to be, as you said, Selena, we have to be careful. We got to make sure we try to protect our shareholders, protect our board of directors, protect the population, protect our patrons, because those patrons could come back against you and say you didn't do what you're supposed to do. So, I mean, it is what it is, and we'll get through this. And that also leads into, Selena, preparing in advance.
Yeah, so preparing in advance. If you haven't already purchased your event cancellation policies for your events coming up in the next year and a half, or if you're still planning or you're concerned about pulling the triggers on those events, it's still the time to start the discussions with the insurance companies. You want to do it as early as possible so that you can actually know, how your policies are going to respond, what types of events you will be able to obtain coverage for. Now, that is critical because we're seeing on like I said, I hate to say daily basis, but every week I'm confronted with a new policy language the carrier's putting in as a result of COVID. So it's changing constantly. You can negotiate. When we start early, we have a much better chance at getting multiple carriers on the risk. Once you have multiple carriers that are willing to write a particular risk, then you have negotiation leverage. Then you can use one against the other and say, oh, well, Munich Re is willing to offer me this. And you say it to Cgl Caitlin, and you've got 2 different Lloyd's subsidiaries that are willing to fight over your business, and you can negotiate and get the best policy. If you're right up against the deadline and you've waited too long, or you were concerned about COVID, so you didn't even want to get, you weren't sure if you were going to move forward, and then boom, you're putting it on in a 45-day period, you're not going to have great insurance. It's just not going to happen. You need to be early this year. You need to document everything. So during those negotiations with the underwriter, you want to make sure that you talk about what your key contracts will include. Do they have 60-day cancellation full refunds? What about the people that are doing your lighting? What about the people that are setting up security, the porta potties? How close to the event can you cancel if there is an issue and you have to cancel because of COVID? All of those items need to be thought out well in advance this year, much earlier than in prior years. And we actually are advocating that you start the insurance discussions with the underwriter 3 to 6 months earlier than you normally would. The other really big thing that's on here, just the second kind of dash under the main bullet, communicate coverage to various locations and department heads. You want to make sure everybody knows the restrictions. So it's great to spend all the time drafting these policies, but then if you don't let people know throughout the different departments that they can't put contracts in without the 60 days, cancellation free of charge. They can't do certain things or else you've written yourself out of coverage. You've just nulled your policies because of the failure to communicate internally. So be very, very careful with that.
The next thing we have, and I mean, this is insurance, and you're on this. You came to this session because you're concerned about it. Well, everybody is. Not everybody eats, sleeps, dreams insurance like Selena does, okay, or like I did, or you, or still do. It's not something that we love to talk about. But, I just wanted to throw this out there. I'm seeing some festivals forming an insurance committee, per se. Usually, how did you normally react, and what happened? The executive director got together with the treasurer. They decided they did some bids. They got a couple of bids. They looked at it. They bought the cheapest one, or they bought one because somebody was nice or they liked what they had. But what we need to do is we need to actually look at it closer than you've ever looked at before. As close as you can look at and look at things. When you're getting ready to look at the renewals, you need to look at what's going on. You need to talk to your insurance carrier. You need to talk to the people that you're presenting stuff to get quotes. You need to look at their options. You need to ask for those options about communicable disease coverage. If they don't have it on there, ask for it. Ask the broker or ask the company, why don't I have this on here? Or ask the question. Go ahead, Selena.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, and look at consider different parametric types of insurance. Look at specialized policies. Here again, I've talked about this. Anybody's been in any of my sessions throughout all these years, all these 20-some years I've been involved with MFEA. You don't just go talk to a local state farm person or a local farm bureau person or an all-state guy and say, I need insurance for my festival. You're not doing that. Those days are gone. Okay, we need to take a look to see. We need to look at your stuff. We need to find out where coverage could be, we could be missing stuff. It's very important to get somebody that's an insurance consultant, somebody who knows about insurance festivals and events, to be involved. And the more information you can give them when you're looking at renewal, and Selena said this already, you need to get out there and do it 3-6 months in advance. A lot of festival people aren't used to doing that. Your event's in June. We would see somebody apply for insurance because they needed certificates of insurance for the city, and they would need them in May, so they wouldn't apply until April. Well, those days are probably going to be over. You're going to need to look ahead of time. For all those of you that have festivals going on this summer, you need to apply for it now. Get your quotes now. You need to also ask, and so I think Selena mentioned this, how about if we don't have the event? What can I get back if I have to cancel my insurance policy? What types of insurance policies do I need to keep instead of just my GL policy? Are there other types of things that I'm going to need? But we're going to need to look at things a little bit more closely. And Selena's pointed this out too. If you have a claim that's denied, you need to ask about it. Take a look at it. Why? Look at the different kinds of things. Selena?
Yeah, let me just add on the one bullet here, provide notice of circumstances. So if you have claims made policies that are about to renew, and if you've had noise or issues and you've heard through the grapevine that, and even if you haven't, quite frankly, for those claims made policies, you have to have a claim come in during the policy year in order to have coverage. After the end of that policy year, that policy is gone. So let's say your employment practices liability claim, and you have a number of employees, and it's up for renewal November 15th. You can provide what's in, let's say your full limits are there. You've got a $5 million EPL policy or a $3 million EPL policy. You haven't used any of it all year long. What you can do now before you renew is you can send in what's called a notice of circumstance. And a notice of circumstance is not a notice of a claim. It's kind of a claim light. And we believe that there may be claims that are coming in as a result of COVID-19. We had a COVID-19 exposure at our location on such and such a date, but you haven't received any demand letters. Those things are called notice of circumstances. And then if a year later you get sued by an estate of somebody who passed away as a result of contracting COVID, it would go, one of your employees, it would go back into that prior year's policy and that prior year's limits. Why is that important? Because if you have limits left in that policy, they're not used. Next year, you may have a full COVID exclusion, and you may have no coverage moving forward. Or even if you do, you may have multiple claims that have depleted your limits. this $3 or $5 million you have right now is just going to disappear if there's no claims and there's no notice of circumstances at the date that that policy expires. So consider whether or not under any of your claims made policies, you have enough. You know, it can't just be, ooh, something may happen. You have to have certain things under each policy to provide what's called the notice of circumstance. So you have to be aware that something happened. And I encourage everybody to make sure that they look at that before their renewal if you've not yet renewed during this pandemic yet.
And what we found in the state of Michigan is most of the people for the Cgl policies have an occurrence policy, so the claims made is not that much of an issue, but it is an issue when it comes to your directors and officers policy. It is an issue, as you mentioned, your EPLI, if you have that type of coverage or whatever. But the main thing is to look to see what you've got, and also you know, a lot of these different types of coverages are going to be made more offerable and going to be more available when you're looking at potentially surplus lines and excess policies of the way the policies are written. You know, you may end up looking at those as a possibility to get coverage where you couldn't buy it in the standard market that you're used to dealing with. But it all depends upon who you're dealing with for your insurance. All right. Okay. Let me see if I can get this thing to work here. Selena, can you see the? I can't see it.
I can see it, but it's not moving to the next slide. There we go.
Okay.
It actually went, it did, so can you move to the next slide? We now have.
I'm gonna look there. It went away. It went away.
Not.
Come on.
So the last two slides, and we'll make sure that these go out to everybody that you can pull them. The next slide was actually just a slide with my law firm's coronavirus guide and the link to it. So Perkins, here it is, for those of you, it's just www.perkinscui.com/coronavirus or /coronavirus. This has a lot of great, free, useful information for all of you. It's got guidelines, it's got checklists on reopening, it's got employment issues, it's got the regulations of the civil authority closures in the different states. So I just encourage people, it's all free content. Can be really helpful, especially if you're looking for a particular thing. One of the issues that we didn't touch upon today is privacy concerns. When you have employees that have contracted COVID and you have to let other employees know, all of those things are addressed, just free information that thought would be helpful to share. With this, we are actually done.
Yep.
We are happy
well, let me just, I need to add something to what you just said there, Selena. You and I have done this, I think this is our third or fourth time. And I didn't know that much about Perkins Cole before you and I were going to hook up the first time and do this for Washington. And I started doing some looking. And hey, folks, let me just say this. Selena and Perkins Cole, they are the real deal, okay? Use their website. Take a look, as Selena just said. Take a look. It's some free stuff on there, and it's good stuff. I learned a lot of things when I was looking at our website. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, free commercial there. How's that?
Appreciate it. No, but seriously, there's a lot of great information for you guys up there. I'm happy to take any questions and calls. I don't know why that says Bruce Skinner.
I don't know why it says Bruce Skinner, but you know what? I've never seen Bruce Skinner be that good looking a guy, though.
Yeah.
These guys don't know who Bruce is.
The other panels with us. Dale's willing to take any of your questions. I'm willing to take your questions. You have our email addresses and our phone numbers. But thank you so much for attending today. We hope it was valuable, and we'll get some stuff out to the Michigan festivals so they can send you some background information.
Oh, here we go. We got something here. Okay, yeah, somebody. Oh, I like it. Somebody's going to call me and ask about. They're going to call Bruce Skinner and ask Bruce Skinner about what's going on. I love it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for taking part and looking. And hey, let's be safe. And as we said, let's looking forward to 2021. Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks,
Selena. Keep in touch. Thank you.
Absolutely.